Hello, and thanks for joining us for this month's edition of The Scope of Things, a no-nonsense look at the realities and enigmas of clinical research based on those closest to the action who aim for great, and if need be, are willing to shake things up. I'm Deborah Borfitz, Senior Science Writer for Clinical Research News. In today's episode, I'll be speaking with Michael Ibara, Pharm.D, Chief Data Officer at Elligo Health Research, who is passionate about using AI and electronic health record data to optimize clinical trials and has the breadth of industry experience in both the hands-on and consulting capacity to know the problems in critical need of addressing. Thanks for joining me on the show today, Michael, to share all the novel possibilities.
Thank you, Deborah.
Okay, I would be curious when you first became a believer in the power and value of AI in clinical research, especially since no one was talking about this seriously even a few years ago. What's the backstory on this, and does it in any way relate to one of the crowning achievements of your career, creation of the first automated adverse event collection and reporting system from electronic health record data?
Yeah, it does actually relate directly. And I'm one of those guys who, as a student, would spend 3 hours programming my HP calculator to do something I could have gotten done in 30 minutes. So I've always been interested to apply technology to solve the problems. But when I started working directly with the EHR data, I started to imagine what could be possible to try and build a better system to use it. And that led to the project that you're mentioning, which was called the Astra Project, where we took adverse events directly from the EHR, processed them automatically, coded them automatically, and sent them on to FDA. And it was a resounding technological success, and it was actually a miserable sort of failure in adoption. I couldn't get it to come in, and I couldn't get the industry to use it. I couldn't get the regulators to okay it at the time. And that really set me down the path of understanding what does it take beyond the technology to bring innovation into clinical research. And that's really what I've never left that. And it led me to work on the standards with the regulators directly. And eventually that led me to Elligo, where the model is sort of attempting to improve the way that we do clinical trials. And that is the basis of my work that I've been doing at Elligo here, where we've been connecting to the EHR data, still working with it, taking advantage of the data. And up to this point has led me to working with artificial intelligence and other tools, applying again to the data, always again, and trying to understand how best to bring innovation into clinical trials. So it's kind of a direct line from that point up until now.
Okay, as you are aware, AI, especially ChatGPT and other brands of generative AI, has been talked about almost to death over the past year.
Yeah.
And yet we have seen very few real world use cases where it has been applied in the context of clinical trials. First, why is that? And second, where do you see AI having the most utility today?
Yeah, I think this is a question of the day and fascinating question. And there are some clear technical reasons due to the nature of the technology today. As you say, definitely with generative AI, there are things that listeners will be aware of now, hallucinations and behavioral drift and things like that.
Yep.
These things are hard to control, but they are controllable. They're technical problems. You really have to roll up your sleeves and get into them to understand how best to handle this sort of thing with the technology in order to make it work for you. But in my opinion, there are three challenges that I've faced throughout my career in clinical trials and in clinical research in general in the industry that hold us back and prevent us from applying the technology in the way that could help us. And the first is lack of imagination. And it sounds harsh, but it's really in the industry that we're in. We very often have to focus on execution and risk mitigation. And it can be hard to be able to imagine how things could work in that kind of environment. The second is this focus that we have often on the letter of the regulation or the law versus the spirit. And I have found that will often hold us back because we'll have a literal interpretation of something that you can do or cannot do, when in fact, we could hit the same goal of the regulation, but do it in a different manner, applying the technology. And the third one, and one of the biggest ones I think that I've seen all along, is we have the wrong mental model or concepts in our head. when we did Astra, one of the things that held us back the most was regulators and industry. Everybody pictured a piece of paper in their head, and it was just sort of very lightweight instead of data. And that prevented you from understanding that you can put in thousands of elements of data into a file that's much smaller than a piece of paper file, a PDF.
Mhm.
And I find that we're doing the same thing today, not understanding really the mental model that goes along with generative AI will hold us back from understanding the applications there. So to me, the things that are holding us back are less technology related, but the promise of this tech, where could it be applied the best?
Mhm.
In my personal opinion, is really everywhere. There's a gentleman, Andrew Ng, in 2017, I think it was, said that AI is the new electricity. And from my point of view, I really believe that. And what that means is very broad application, but you have to understand where it's best to apply. You can see it in drug discovery, but especially in clinical trials, you can already see it in patient matching, especially in the fields like oncology, where they have a very complex data set that includes medical data and genetic data. And they need machine learning and AI to be able to go through that data and help understand how it might match up for patients to trials. But where I think the immediate application of AI is today for clinical trials and what I call scut work, which is a term coming out of the healthcare side when you're working hospital. And it's the work that just is menial, it's repetitive. And when you look across clinical trials, your programmers today, programming the whatever applications they're working on, they're all using AI to make their work easier and faster. When you look at document creation, protocol creation, whatever it might be, that's a direct application of AI that can help there, especially generative AI. In the regulatory space, signing regulatory documents, reviewing regulatory documents. These are areas that AI can help us with. And then protocol, once you generate a protocol, people trying to follow it. We had a protocol the other day, it was over 300 pages.
Yikes.
And asking investigators and study coordinators to try and follow the processes in that protocol, just that alone, trying to look up things there, even if it's online, can be very difficult. And there's direct application of AI to be able to help them with that as well. So for
Mhm.
me, what's holding us back is often what's in our own heads. And the most direct application today for AI is in helping us solve those tasks that really are simply repetitive, that we can have AI do better.
Yeah. AI, of course, consumes a lot of data, and more of it than ever before has been digitized across healthcare as well as in the clinical research realm. But these arenas are heavily regulated, as you point out, by multiple agencies domestically and around the world. How does that change what can be done just in terms of the regulatory side of things and the pace of AI adoption?
Yeah, this is such a challenge. And from the outside, I think when you look at healthcare with the regulations in the clinical trial industry, you can often just throw up your hands and imagine, well, we're never going to get progress there. And in fact, often tech companies coming into this space, what happens is what I call they break up on the regulatory rocks. They don't understand, and so they think it's going to be quick, and when it's not, then they sometimes just completely back out. I think first of all, for me, one recognition that I believe is that the shape of the sort of innovation curve is the same. It's just elongated. So when you watch in the music industry, in the publishing industry, in the banking industry, every industry, when you've digitized most of the data there, what happens is something that I refer to as the Cozy in economics. Ronald Coase, the economist, said, as the transaction costs of doing business go to zero, new business models can emerge. And so when you digitize data, you make it that much easier. You make the transaction cost very small. You get new business models. That's happening today in healthcare and in drug development and clinical trials. And so I believe it's the same curve. You'll see the same things that happen in publishing, banking, music industry. It's just that it took longer to get started for us, but it's definitely starting now. And secondly, I think that maybe paradoxically for some people, but AI could actually have a greater effect in clinical trials exactly because of what I mentioned before, because so much of it is made up of what I'm calling scut work, of the repetitive tasks that have to be done.
Mm.
You can apply AI in those situations to actually make it easier to comply with the regulations. And so I
Right.
think that's a great promise there. Really the danger in all of this, I think, is you can't escape the fact that you could throw the baby out with the bathwater. We do need regulations. The problem is, as I mentioned before, if the regulators have the wrong sort of mental concepts, they will tend to regulate one problem, but actually make innovation very difficult. So I do think there are challenges there, but I think there's real promise as well.
Yeah. And this may relate to what you just said to some degree, but I was going to ask, is there any real urgency to adopt AI technology to the conduct of clinical trials that couldn't be accomplished by other tried and true methods? And if so, related question, who should be making the business case for its adoption, and how would they go about doing that?
Yeah, that's a great question because I think there's such a temptation to simply say, well, this is kind of newfangled stuff. We can do what we've always done. In fact, when you look at some very specific examples, you can't do with tried and true methods what you do with AI. Reviewing medical charts, for example, medical charts on a single patient can be 300 to 500 pages or more. We need 20 humans set up to review 10 charts over a certain period of time if you're trying to do it in a timely fashion. Those 20 people can be replaced by 2 people and an AI program, which we've done at Elligo for chart review. And so
Wow.
that's impossible to do without AI. We've got an AI chatbot that helps lead patients through conduct of trials, and it learns their preferences and who they are along the way. And you can deploy that chatbot at scale and talk to 1,000 patients with a handful of humans, whereas before it's sort of a linear relationship between the number of humans to do that and the number of patients involved. And finally, as I was mentioning before, following a protocol, we have a product called Protocol Copilot that's basically a chatbot that lets you talk and ask questions in real time in your language to the protocol, and it gives you back answers. All these things are examples of AI that can't be done with tried and true methods today. And that's why, for me, there's an urgency because that improves compliance, it improves the process of clinical trials. And who needs to make that case?
Yeah.
Frankly, unfortunately, maybe for me, I need to make that case because it's the
Yeah.
people that believe in it, the people that are working with it. They need to make a financial case because otherwise people won't listen or invest. And we need to make the case to the regulators to help them understand those sort of mental models where they can see this is an opportunity that we can do that doesn't contravene regulations and gives us progress.
Right. So, but is one of the roadblocks or part of the problem that there's a disconnect between people who are experts in AI and those who are experts in clinical trials, and those two worlds kind of don't collide? And even if there was perfect overlap, what about this whole acceptability factor in terms of the technology and how would-be participants feel about it?
Yeah, I think you put your finger on one of the key challenges today and something I experience on a daily basis. As you say, the domain experts, sort of in classic regulatory and clinical trial operations, and the domain experts in the AI technology are in separate orbits to a large part. And what that creates is solutions that don't really fix the problem. They may be technically cool, or they may fix a small part of the problem, but actually didn't really use the tech. And um, I think for the folks making the decisions in clinical trials, there's the author Arthur C. Clarke had a quote, something like any sufficiently advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic. If you think about your first interaction with Chat GPT, it feels like magic and it feels like you're talking to somebody. And
Hmm.
that's great from the user experience. But when we're trying to apply AI to something, you need the people that know the domain to also understand enough about the tech. So the worlds, as you say, they do not collide enough. And we really need more, bilingual people in a sense who know both domains that can translate for people, but also it's essential because it's the only way you'll understand the problem and understand what you can really do with the tech rather than just kind of have magical thinking about it.
Yeah.
So I'm all for this sort of bilingual education of folks for this.
Hmm. You've mentioned several times now about the design of study protocols. So let's just spend a minute there and how AI can help ensure they work with real world patients in real world healthcare settings, which effectively determines whether a study even gets off the ground. Is this another sort of deep dive into the electronic health record to be sure the imagined patients exist and enough of them are there to pull from?
Yeah, I think it is. I think we have been doing deep dives for a while. I think it's that plus, and the plus would be that now, because we can scale chatbots and talk directly to patients in a sense, we can gather from them information that you won't find in the EHR. And for those that haven't worked in it before, for example, smoking status, you actually don't often find that in the EHR. Or maybe you need to know, what is your general level of activity? How many times a day do you walk? Or a specific clinical condition, how much of the area of your body is affected, both arms, both legs, your trunk. These things you don't find directly in the EHR, but we can ask questions directly to patients. And that's real world data that directly affects whether you're qualified for certain studies or not. So I think that protocol design coupled with this sort of direct conversation now with the patients that you're interested in,
Hmm.
AI holds great promise for that aspect.
Okay, interesting. Okay, so and once a study is underway, then how might AI be used to help track how participants are doing? Maybe, I don't
Yeah,
know, up to the minute information flowing to a dashboard of some kind, viewable by
yeah.
study teams. Like what kind of data and alerts do you imagine them receiving that look different or prompt action in ways that aren't happening today?
I think this is a tremendous area of opportunity. And I think where it starts is actually with a better experience for the patient, because we can, as I said before, with AI, we can learn their preferences and we can help guide them through the study because the AI will have been pre-programmed with the information about what they need to do. They can ask a general question and get back information, or they can ask a question that would lead it to be go out to a person that needs to call them back, et cetera. All of that goes to the patient's experience, which helps engage them in the trial, keep them in the trial. Along the way, though, between them and the same sort of thing with the sites and the people working with the protocols, when they get stuck in an area, if they ask the same question 4 times, you know that there's an issue there. And the study
Mm.
team can get that information back immediately and now have some sort of real time alert that so and so is struggling with this area. And they can target that and try and talk them through it. Whereas now you may go for several days before you see your doctor to resolve that, or you may drop out because you're frustrated. So I think that's a great area of application.
Hmm. Okay, let's assume for a second that all external constraints to AI adoption were magically removed and clinical trial sponsors were free to experiment with whatever technologies caught their eye. Now, let's turn to the internal processes that might first need to change to take advantage of those opportunities.
Yeah, there's another, I'm full of phrases. There's another
I
phrase that I use. There was a
love
great
this.
BBC article a while ago talking about why steam transfer from steam power to electricity didn't produce immediate productivity. And it was because they needed to change the factory floor to take advantage of these small electric motors that they had. And what I tell my colleagues is for clinical trials, we need to change the factory floor, which means in order to get the value from AI in clinical trials, we need to change our clinical trial processes. And typically, the way we do this is to reimagine, and it goes back to those things holding us back, how things could be done, and then sort of work backward to try and retrofit to do as much of that as possible without completely disrupting things. What usually happens is we try and run the same processes and then sprinkle technology on the top. And that's simply going to keep the same inefficiencies embedded. So the goal here, I think, is to have that imagination to be able to put together what would clinical trials look like, as you say, if we took constraints off and we were able to use the technology the way it's best used, and then look at that as your 2B model, and then chart the path from where you're at to where the 2B model ends and work to get there.
Yeah, makes total sense. I want to end with a question that gets back to the regulated nature of clinical research and where AI might fit in here. From the standpoint of sponsors and the FDA, what changes do you foresee coming over the short and over the long term as it relates to the notoriously slow and often tedious drug approval process that we are forever talking about?
Yeah, I agree. And then I've lived for many years. I think that this is one of the most exciting times for the industry that we've been in. Very scary, but very exciting. And that's because there are several regulatory trends coming together, I think. One is started with 21st Century Cures for the US and the release of that healthcare data. and now it's ubiquitous. And so we have the potential to use all that data. The second is what we've been talking about. It's the development of generative AI and other AI technologies that are ripe now to consume that data and create better solutions. And the other one is a push toward the agency of the patient. And with the what ONC has been doing and in academic medical centers, pushing the ability for patients to own their own data and understanding it, that means that we can begin to work directly with the patients. They can consent to the research directly as they need to. They can form groups if they're interested in it. And these things allow us to sort of get a momentum for clinical research where patients are knowledgeable and participating. And I think that can directly speed up clinical research and drug development. And that allows us to look at other development models, which, FDA and the EU have been looking at for quite a while, where we release a drug, we're able to monitor patients much more closely and in real time. And that allows us to begin to sort of release it to larger and larger cohorts and move it through the process faster. That's a lot of work to be done, but I do think the elements are there to try and achieve it.
Wow, we might actually kick the ball down the road a little. Imagine that. Michael, thank you so much for this fresh take on how AI can legitimately pick up the speed in getting drugs to market, at least in part by providing an avenue for patients to access clinical trials more easily, readily, and keep track of progress in general. And AI progress itself is unlikely to slow down anytime soon. So I plan to revisit the topic regularly, if only to stay current on where major inroads are in fact being made. I appreciate you taking the time to be on the show today.
That's great, Deborah. It's been my pleasure, and thank you for having me.
You are so very welcome. And as always, a big thank you to everyone out there for listening in. If you're not subscribed to this podcast yet, please consider going to Apple Podcasts and doing so right now so you don't miss your monthly dose of news and perspectives you'll be hard-pressed to find anywhere else. And if you're up for it, I'd be so very grateful if you'd leave a rating and review on Apple Podcasts too. One final note, if you'd like today's conversation, and I'm sure you did, it's only a glimpse of what we have on tap for CHI's Summit for Clinical Ops Executives, aka SCOPE. Please plan to join us February 11th to the 14th in Orlando, Florida. I will be there. And be sure to use discount code SOT10 for a 10% discount off any current rate. For more information, visit scopesummit.com. Bye for now.